let's just start at the beginning, if that's okay. So first of all, what are both your backgrounds, and how did did you have any sort of prior knowledge of history or anything like that?
Well, I went to art school back in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was through art school that I got involved with the Egypt Exploration Society in London, and through them became really interested in the whole historical side of biblical history and all of that, and also because my family were kind of it was a mixed marriage. My mother was an Irish Catholic, my father was an English Protestant, who didn't have much time for religion or the church or anything like that, and always said that I should investigate. And of course, the more I got into it, the more fascinating I found it. I don't have any qualifications as such, but the only qualification I've got is over 40 years of intense study of anything from academic papers to mass popular books. It's something I just find really fascinating.
Right, and Jennifer, how did kind of the journey start?
Well, I don't have a background in ancient history or biblical history at all either. My background is in fine arts, and I've worked in classical music, so it's just kind of was by chance, really. It was through my work in Latterly as a publicist in London that I came across a journalist, and he showed us images of the codices, and that's really how we first came across them. And it really was just chance more than anything else. We weren't pursuing this at all.
And should we just to touch on that that kind of the event, that the inception, the kind of the event that started it? What do you want to kind of tell us about that?
Well, we moved out of London. We'd moved to Oxfordshire, and we were staying in just south of the city of Oxford. And Jennifer's acquaintance got in touch because he said he lived not far away, which in Benson, wasn't it? Was it north of Oxford?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he just lived nearby.
Yeah, nearby. That's right. And so we kind of we were having supper with them, and it was really interesting. He said he just had an email through from this chap in Israel, and would I mind going up to his study to actually look at the images. So we both went up and had a look, and it was really interesting because the first thing I thought when I saw the images, they were very low res and very indistinct. I thought they were just leather codices. They were obviously books in book form, and I thought they'd been bound with leather rings. And I said to him, well, they're just leather codices, really. I said, they look interesting. And he said, no, they're not leather, they're actually lead.
Right.
And that's when suddenly the ears shot up, and I kind of got really interested in the whole thing.
Right, and was that the same for you, Jennifer? Did you have how did you, when you first spoke to your friend and he showed you the email and whatever?
Well, he was very kind of cagey about the whole background of it and where they came from. He, being a journalist, was interested in having a scoop, so he wanted to know right away what they were, and didn't kind of appreciate that things like that take quite a long time to study, and you also have to test the metal. You can't just kind of give an assessment up front. It takes quite a long time, so he finally then appreciated that we were going to have to do that and start a whole process. But we were quite eager to be on board because they were very fascinating, and we'd never seen anything like them before.
Wow. Another question then. So can you explain to me what exactly is a codice, or in this case a codex? Is it called a codex?
Yeah, the codex is the earliest known form of the book. So in a book, generally, a hardbound book, for instance, you've got a sheaf of papers that are then covered top and bottom with a piece of very hard paper or board, and then of course you have the spine, you see, so it's all bound, and then the end papers actually connect the sheaf of papers by being glued to the spine. So that's the modern form of the book. So the codex literally was a series of plates or parchments that had actually been sewn together literally by having holes punched through the spine, and then binding material like reeds or leather strips.
And these are made out of lead?
But yes, but these are made out of lead, exactly,
Right.
and therefore they're the earliest known form of the book, as we can tell. So that's a codex,
Right.
meaning literally that which is enciphered, which is encoded. And then the plural to that is codices, and of course what we've discovered is a series of codices, a plural.
So lead was used. So this is kind of the oldest form of a book that anybody's ever found.
It seems it, yeah. I mean, and that's interesting in itself, because the book is actually associated at the beginning with the Christian religion,
Right.
not necessarily with Judaism.
So before then they were writing on tablets of stone, were they?
There were tablets of stone, and then of course you've got the famous Torah scroll, which all Jews used in their services in synagogues and elsewhere. If you're devout.
What was that written on?
Generally written on parchment or vellum, which is a form of lambskin which has been beaten out and then obviously dried. And
So they still have one of them, do they?
They do, yeah, indeed. And but this is what's really interesting about the Codices is that, like Judaism, they share the same language. They share a Hebrew language,
Right.
but the language is what they call Paleo-Hebrew.
So it was later. It came later.
It's much it's actually an earlier language, and it's a bit like its use in the first century period of Jesus is a bit like the use of Latin today in Parliament. It's a kind of a decorous language that kind of connects you with previous history going back a long time, and kind of gives you a kind of a sort of a kind of a luster, as it were. So that, it's quite kind of gilds the lily, if you like. I mean, when a new peer is introduced into the House of Lords, he sent letters of marque, which are all written in Latin, and of course then signed by the monarch, etc. So there's that kind of feel to it.
So we got the book and lead. Sorry, my history is not that good, but lead was how far back does lead exist?
Now, lead goes right the way back to the beginning of time, because lead literally is formerly highly radioactive material like uranium and other metals
so
or
it's
elements.
easy to date. It must be easy to date, right?
Well, you'd have thought so, but it's been very, very tricky for the University of Surrey to try and extract any dates out of it, because there are different ways of treating it.
Yeah.
If you can think that a piece of lead generally is really not radioactive, okay? So the radiation has left it. It's become known as lead. But in recent experiments, we found that the lead we were testing was radioactive, suggesting therefore that the artifact concerned was made very recently. But we knew from the provenance of the family who owned the object that they'd had it in their hands for at least 50 years.
Right. Let's come back to that, guys. So because what I want to do is kind of start. So we've basically we've got we know what the object is, the codex, in layman's terms. But so you've got this email, you've discovered, and so then what did you do? What were your actions after you've seen this email, and where did you take it from there?
Well, the journalist gave us a photocopy of some of the images that he had received through, and we took them back, and David studied them, and basically we told him that he needed to test the metal, because before even bringing any scholars on board, we had to kind of ascertain whether they really were authentic, because we had never seen anything like them before. And so he agreed to that, and went to the University of Reading and had a spectrographic test done, which came back that it was compatible with Roman lead, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So that pretty much showed that it was ancient. So it was very encouraging for a start.
Fantastic. And then my next question would be, who found it, and who found it, and where did they find it?
Well, that I can't give you a totally straightforward answer from, because we've heard various stories from the Israeli Bedouin Hassan, who actually claimed to have bought them from the site, from somebody that found them, and he had said something about being a taxi driver from Aqaba, but also we also know that there were some other people in the village that were digging around, and when it was actually raining very hard, and apparently, according to his story, there was a big flood, and they noticed that there was water seeping out through the stones, so they knew that there had to be a cave or something in there, so they put the rock aside and then found them there, and that would have been, from what he said, 2005. And so whatever the truth is, there were probably a number of people from the village and the area that found them, and then they were sold them to him, quite a lot of them to him, because he's a wealthy farmer and had the means to buy them.
Right. So I mean, because that's probably where most people are going to be questioning the whole situation. Is like, you know, the discovery, who found them, and the kind of authenticity of that, you know.
Yes, it's very important for the provenance of them to know where they were found. But we do know we did went back to when we finally realized that they were in Jordan. They were found in Jordan. We went there and went to the cave site and looked around, so we know where they come from. So we do have, they are provenance. It is a provenance discovery.
So these were found in Jordan, which is obviously next door.
Yes. Initially, he told us they were found in Israel. So we were working on that basis for quite some time, because he was afraid to tell us that, because basically if they came from Jordan, that means they'd been smuggled, which they were.
So you mean they've been smuggled into Jordan?
Out of Jordan into Israel.
So,
and in fact, there were records from the border control showing that a number of them had been confiscated when he actually took them back into Israel. But he had so many of them, he would take in, a few at a time and cross the border.
So this guy lives in Israel?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Just up in the north, underneath the gaze of Mount Tabor. What's really interesting about when they also, an added detail at the site, when the rainwaters came, it washed away the topsoil. When they found the stone that capped the cave, it actually had a Paleo-Hebrew tav on it, with letter T, which is to us an X shape, which is very interesting. So literally, X was marking the spot. I often wondered if that's where the saying comes from, because it literally did in this case.
Wow. So because I kind of want to go back to your own personal discovery here of this whole this whole thing. And so you got the email. You told me who found them. What happened? So what happened after that? Did you communicate with this guy? Did you communicate via somebody else? Did you go and visit this?
Well, there was a small team that we had gotten together with various experts and people that we thought because it's quite a thing to manage and to do justice by it. So we did that, and in the end. We didn't get very far before a number of them started to kind of think, well, these are worth something, maybe we can sell them. And we weren't very happy with that because...
So you were in communication with this...
Initially we weren't in communication with the Bedouin. We were working with a group of British people. There was a metallurgist and the journalist, and somebody was kind of helping to do some of the legal background. And then we kind of had a falling out with them because we thought that they should be preserved and studied and... that everyone should see them, and they were just interested in selling them on the black market. So there was a bit of a
working with here.
Yes, there was a bit of a rupture, and so the journalist then just said, well, here's his number, you speak to him yourself, and so basically David called him, and that's what happened.
Yeah, it was a really terrifying call in many ways because.
Does he speak English?
Yeah, he speaks reasonably good English, but and I speak really poor Arabic, i.e. zero. But when I spoke with him, he was obviously celebrating out in the wilds of northern Israel somewhere, and he was having a high old time because he was very, celebratory. He was really high on the whole party, and so of course it was a bit of a shouting match because he was trying to raise his voice above the din. And the more I told him about what I believed these things were and how they should be treated, the more interested he became. And that was interesting in itself because... And
he still had these at the time, he hadn't sold them on?
No, he hadn't, no. And then we actually made the first of our tests of him. We said to him it was going to require a certain level of funding to get these things tested and get them tested properly to see if they're authentic or not. Because if we couldn't do that, then there was no point in going on. He was very committed to having them tested and paying that analytical cost.
So he paid himself.
He paid the initial analytical costs to the journalist concerned.
Which also, if they were fakes, as they've been accused of, why would he, if he knew that they were fakes and he had manufactured them, as he's also been accused of as well, why would he spend thousands, tens of thousands of pounds getting them tested just to prove they're fake?
Yeah.
I mean, it does.
I mean, I guess people might think that he's investing in this.
He is, but to spend that much money, if you even you're only going to want to do it if you really are convinced they're real. If you know that they've been manufactured, or even have a slightest suspicion that they have been, and he would be in the know about that, having then you just wouldn't spend that kind of money, because he was absolutely convinced, because he knew, and he'd actually been to the cave site himself and seen where they had been found, that he knew that they were real.
So my next question would be: have you actually been? Did you go there to Jordan?
Yes,
you did.
We went in 2009 to.
So you both went to Jordan
yes.
in 2009,
and we were accompanied by the Jordanian military intelligence to the cave site the first time we went, and they showed and we went looking for caves, and we found quite a few things. We didn't find the cave where the codices were found. That's still as of yet undiscovered again, we think. Yeah. But then we went again. We were invited back to Jordan in 2011.
But coming back to 2009, do you think that weren't you able to talk to the villagers that found?
At the time we did encounter some shepherds who were there in the valley site, and they knew of caves, and they showed us some of the caves, and we did find some amazing caves. One of them had first century tombs, and another one had a wine press, and they were, so we did see some, and the whole area is just littered with caves, so you could see it had been a community at one point. But
why was it that you couldn't find the actual caves, really? Do you think
the site is absolutely massive? I mean, you're talking about something which is the size of Petra in terms of dimensions,
right?
Because you enter the valley through a side road just outside the village, which is marked itself by a Jewish ritual bath, a mikveh, and a first century sarcophagus.
Right.
You then take the path down, and as you carry on walking, you're going literally down into a great chasm. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and it just carries on for miles. It is vast. It is such a huge area.
But my question would be: do you think the farmer's keeping kind of guarded about who he bought them off, because he doesn't want? He's kind of keeping.
Oh yeah, they're all very working together to kind of protect each other. So
he's kind of like in charge of.
Well, he bought the bulk of the collection. He said he paid $250,000, and he bought, I think there were, initially we saw 35 codices, 4 tablets and 3 scrolls.
That's
and
what he had.
Incense bowl. That's what he had, but we thought that was all he had. But then after we came back from our trip, he would then send us more images of more codices that he had, and different ones, some copper. He told us about a silver one he had, so there could have been more.
So guys, this is a farmer. This is the kind of the wealthy farmer who now has this collection.
Yes.
Did you visit him in 2009? Did you
yes.
visit him, and did you actually see the codices?
Yes, we did. He invited us over there to photograph them, and we went to his village and we stayed in his house for several days, and we photographed them. And he's a wealthy farmer, but he's also deals in drugs, and he also owns some land to dig for antiquities, which is what Bedouin do. So he does a lot of different
marijuana.
things. Yes, but that's very typical of him. It's not.
Grass.
Yeah, a lot of that too.
It's to his credit though that he wanted to find out what they were. He equally is fascinated by them.
Is he a Bob Marley fan?
He might well be actually, but no.
So if I go to Jerusalem or Israel and I need some grass, this is the guy.
You know where to go. Yeah.
You probably get something even stronger than grass from him.
Yeah, probably. Yes, exactly right.
I'll take his number before you go, guys. What could you maybe David? Could you tell me what the codices were? What collection did he have? Were they all the same? Were they made out of the same materials?
Largely they were. There were a few objects which were highly suspect, frankly, which were made of copper, but they were kind of like copper plates, and the edges on them were too sharp, and when you looked under the corrosion it was very polished.
So they've been faked, some of them?
We think so, definitely, because the fact of the matter is, when we spoke to a senior professor, Professor Philip Davies, actually, formerly of the Dead Sea Scrolls team, he told us, actually, that's a good sign, because quite often Bedouin will pad out a discovery with little bits and pieces of their own, because of course they have to make money from this,
Right.
and the more they can make, the better.
Because
So-
kind of grave robbery's been going for centuries.
Oh, absolutely, yeah,
with the,
yeah. Well, archaeology is grave robbery.
Yeah.
That's all we're doing.
with
Archaeology
the
is about
pyramids.
it's about destroying things to see
Yeah.
what's inside them. That's all it is.
So 2009, you've gone, you visited this guy's place. You've seen the codices. You've had a look around the site, but obviously you don't know exactly where they were found because I guess you went. You were escorted
we
by
do
the
have
military.
images that he gave us, a lot of
Right.
photographs of various ones that they went into, and there are a couple of them that we think probably
You know where they are.
we know where they are.
And were they found in different places or all in one place, do you think?
Different places, but within the same site.
area.
Yeah.
The whole area looks like a first century habitation. If you think that we've got a good water source there, the place is very fertile. Even to this day, they grow all sorts of things from pomegranates and dates to bananas, and they had other vegetables
So
growing
there's a
there.
river, obviously, close by.
There's a little channel, a conduit for water running through the whole of the valley. On top of that, we had many caves, as Jennifer said, with wine presses and obviously signs of habitation. When I went into some of those caves,
Yep.
the floor was full of a very fine talc-like powder, and it was very thick in terms of the foot tread you would leave. It's fairly obvious that those places had not been stepped into for a very, very considerable period of time.
And what is the area? Could you give me an example? Is the area as big as, say, where I come from, Colchester in Essex? How big is it? Is it like a field, like a large football field? Is it?
Oh no, you're talking about many football fields. In fact, I'd say you're talking in terms of stadia. I mean, it's even bigger than that. It is vast.
Yeah, it
It's a
took
big
us
place.
5 hours to kind of trek around one day. We spent just
Right.
walking around.
And we still only got halfway really into the valley, and when you're down at the bottom, you suddenly look up, and it's like sort of being in a medieval illumination, because there on the the top of the cliff face, there are two vast eye sockets of a skull-like promontory that are staring out at you. It's really quite remarkable. And of course, one thinks of Golgotha in that sense, because Golgotha means Hill of the Skull, and that's precisely what this valley is marked by. In fact, the general we met in the valley on one of the trips said it's called the Valley of the Skull because of that.
Wow.
Which was really interesting.
So let's take the story forward. So 2009, you've gone on this trip. You've seen the codices, and were you able to take any samples back with you?
Yes, we got quite a lot of dust and pollen samples, and we also had little bits of shavings from our Israel trip. When he opened them and showed it to us, little tiny particles fell off, so we scooped those up and took them. So we do have
So
samples.
that's the 2009. So what happened between? So you've seen them. You've gone to the site. You've seen these codices. The next question what I want to ask is, what is actually in the codices? What's written inside?
That's really interesting. We got in touch with a number of academics in 2009, knowing and feeling confident enough to move on to the next stage in terms of getting them involved. And a number of them were sent photographs of some of the tablets photographs of the tablets we had in our possession, and some of the books as well. And what's really interesting is that what we have are messianic texts or testimonia, and they're full of prophecies about the Messiah, his coming, his identity, and the fact that he is the Messiah. So we've got quotes from Proverbs, we've got quotes from Psalms, we've got quotes from the book of Daniel, which is a very apocalyptic, prophetic book. And then reading recently of other work undertaken in the 40s and 50s by Dr. Hugh Schonfield, we can see that what we've got matches perfectly his description of what testimonia were. They're not histories, they're not diaries. Some people said, are they Jesus' personal diaries? Well, we have to consider that, in those days people didn't write diaries. There's no sense of, I went to the temple today and I slaughtered a sheep and it cost me half a silver shekel, etc., etc. There's none of that. This is about texts that were used to define the role of the Messiah, when he would come, who he would be. And that's why, interestingly, when Hassan showed us the one lead codex in his collection that has a face on it, that it's interesting the face itself should be enshrined by a halo or a nimbus.
So what instantly you're thinking, obviously AD
30.
30 AD?
Yeah.
So 30 years after the fact,
It's literally, AD 30 is generally accepted as being it's the fulcrum point of Western history, because that is held to be the year within which Jesus was crucified. Some say 33, some say 36, but 30 is generally the guide point.
So these codices were written directly after his death?
I think they were written actually before his death.
Before his death, right.
Because he has to have had them in order to have shown who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And the very fact that the central codex contains his image on its front cover, and that it is enshrouded in a nimbus or a halo, is very indicative that he is performing the role of a divine king, or semi-divine king, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
Because the nimbus dictates that when the face is inside the halo, it is saying it is separate from the world outside. And what that means is that he had obviously been enthroned deep inside the holiest place, inside the Temple of Jerusalem. Because the representation of images in Judaism is very controversial. The Deuteronomists of the Old Testament say images are all banned, and there's no such thing as a graven image. And we've been accused of these things, of faking these things, or of these things being fake, because of that image of his face. But however, in the book of Exodus, again an Old Testament text and very ancient, Moses does see God face to face. So in other words, you can see the face. But I think that is why this book was both sealed and then put into a metal or lead ark, and was then sealed away again in a cave. It was meant to be seen by very, very few people.
Right. Because obviously he was, Jesus was involved in a cult, as they saw it in those days. It was like a cult, like a religious sect.
This is the curious thing. We're told, and we generally assume, that there was only one form of Judaism at the time of Jesus.
Right.
But there wasn't. The Judaism we're familiar with today, rabbinical Judaism, wasn't actually formulated until the Council of Jamnia in 200 AD, or CE as some would call it. During Jesus' time, there were many Judaisms. And we had many sects of Judaism. We had the Sadducees, the Pharisees, we had the Essenes, and then we had Zadokites, we had sons of Melchizedek, the sons of light, we had Baptists, Dosithians, and so on and so forth. The list is endless. So what you've got is a kind of miasma of different sects, some of whom actually controlled the main temple of Jerusalem, which of course was the Sadducees. So in a sense, you can't say that Jesus was a sectarian in the way that it diminishes him. You've got to say he's a sectarian like everybody else.
Everybody was involved in it.
Yes. Yeah.
There wasn't like one blanket style of
Judaism. No, there was no centralised idea of you must say this, you can't do that.
Well, it's like Christianity. I mean, even I was, I think I was reading about a book about, the church in Jerusalem. I think it's Jerusalem, where they have like 4 or 5 different religions all trying to look after the one church.
Yes. And
then they have fights breaking out every now and
That's
then.
right. Yeah. In fact, last Christmas, I believe the Copts and the Ethiopian Orthodox got into a fist fight. with some chaps from the West. They may even have been Catholics of some sort.
There's like a ladder, isn't there, leaning against somewhere.
Yeah. It's the Church of the Edicule, which is in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And different sections of it are owned by different denominations, and that's why they had to call in Martin Biddle of Oxford University to actually restore the thing and to actually preserve it, because
nobody could agree.
Yeah, nobody could agree, exactly. And ironically, the people who have the keys to the Edicule, the people who actually are the overseers of it, are Muslims.
So, could you tell me, Jennifer, where are the actual codices at the moment? Where they're being kept?
Well, that's actually a very good question. We know that there are still some of them. According to Hassan, the Israeli Bedouin, the last time I spoke with him was earlier this year, and he hasn't sold all of them, so he has sold some of them. So he still has some codices with him in Israel. And as far as the ones in Jordan, that's actually a question that we would like to put to the Director of Antiquities, the current one, Munter Jamhawi, because when we went in 2011, we were invited to the Department of Antiquities, and we were asked to choose a codex out of a collection that we saw, there were 24 of them, to take back to the UK for testing. We saw them all there with our own eyes, and there are other witnesses that did too, and they've since disappeared, and they've denied that they have ever had them. So
where did they get them from? Did they get them from the farmer?
No. Well, some of them they might have gotten from the Jordanian military intelligence, because they had confiscated some of them at the border, and they had held them in their offices and then gave them to the Department of Antiquities. And there have been some people that have had them. I don't know how they got them, but they've had them in their homes, whether they got them from the site, and they just turned them into the Department of Antiquities because they realized when we made an announcement that they were actually historically important artifacts, and they did the decent thing and turned them in.
Right, so Jordan's got there's a famous guy, isn't there, in Egypt, who looks after all the pyramids. I can't remember his name, but
Zahi Hawass.
Yes.
Zahi Hawass,
Yeah.
There's the equivalent. Is there an equivalent guy in Jordan?
Not that we know of. The previous director of the Department of Antiquities was a very distinguished archaeometallurgist, and he did an amazing job, and he did 2 series of tests, both at the Royal Scientific Society and the Atomic Commission. Was it?
I think it was the Atomic Energy Commission.
Yeah, Atomic Energy Commission. And both series of tests came out positive, and he's one of the world's leading archaeometallurgists, so he knows what he's doing. And he was forbidden from releasing the results. So there's an obvious conspiracy and a cover-up within Jordan for the codices, and I think largely then also they've since they've disappeared, they're very keen to kind of keep it quiet and suppress it, because they know that whatever's happened to them, whether they've been sold.
And who would buy them? What kind of people would buy them? Do you know?
Well, private collectors, and we listened to a radio interview. I think it was in 2013 or 14 by MP Robert Jenrick, and he was talking about the trade, both legal and illegal, in London, and a lot of antiquities from the Middle East are sold through London, through either auction houses or privately, and the largest percentage of people that buy these antiquities, at least biblical ones, are American evangelist Christian collectors. They have a lot of money.
Right. Okay, great.
I think the whole thing's offering a huge amount of hard currency to Jordan, because the codex itself is an important archaeological and historical object. But ironically, since we have shown them to be authentic, of course the value of them has shot up. So of course, in selling them to smugglers and other people, the Jordanians are obviously getting backhanders from the sales, and of course that hard currency is going where it goes.
Right.
That's the great tragedy of all of this, is that they have something which could be a phenomenally busy and important tourist site with a museum dedicated to the codices. It would be one of the great crowd pullers in the world, and instead they've just gone for the myopic vision of let's sell them.
Do you think are you going on record saying that the Jordanians are doing this?
No.
Is that a little bit?
No, it's not. The Jordanians are not acting alone. They're actually following orders from an American, maybe several of them, but an American research center, and we won't say the name, but they have been controlling archaeological digs in the Middle East since the 1960s, and
is this got to do this? Because this sounds crazy.
It is crazy, but they've been doing it for a really long time, and we've had.
So you're saying that there's some company or some
it's an organization
in America.
Not in America. Well, their headquarters are in America, but they have branches in Jordan and Israel and perhaps elsewhere in the Middle East.
Right.
And that's basically what they do. They control the digs there, and either some things are inconvenient and they disappear.
And is this specifically in Jordan and Israel, not in Egypt?
I don't think it's in Egypt, but I'm not 100% certain. I think it's largely in Jordan and Israel.
And is there a religious context to this? Do you think, is it because they...
Yes, I think there is that element. It's because their background is...
They're funded
by evangelist Christians.
Right.
So
the thing is that you must understand the antiquities trade is one of the richest streams of the arts trade in the world. Antiquities fetch a huge amount of money, and so the codices, particularly in being probably the earliest known Christian objects, are of immense value, not just for us culturally and historically, but also to these dealers who are selling them off most likely illegally. So there's a lot of money to be made.
So as a farmer told you, what kind of relationship do you have with the farmer? Is he...
Oh, it's a love-hate. Well, love is a bit too strong, but sometimes he calls and we chit-chat because he gives information away, but he's also crazy and difficult. And
but has he told you, like, for example, how much he's sold one for? To who?
No, but he did the last conversation thank us because he has a really big house now.
Right.
And is able to pay for his children's education, so obviously he's done well out of it.
So he's made money
from
the publicity,
from on the back of our publicity, and
right.
at least he had the decency to thank us. But that's...
So then the big question is going to be what's in it for you guys? What's in it for the...
Well, the same thing we've always been in it for is all we've ever wanted to do was to hand it over to experts to deal with. And particularly the Jordanians, we wanted to say, here, this is your discovery, it was found in your country,
right.
You do something about it. And it was like a hot potato, nobody wanted to touch it. And so we've just been stuck because we recognize the significance of it and feel that everybody has a right to know what their heritage is through the codices and what they mean. But nobody's wanted to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. And instead, we've tried to make it public to force the hand of the Jordanians and anyone else that could possibly help, but they've just ignored it. They've gone silent.
Well, I guess every step of the way, people are gonna, people who might watch this YouTube video might say, well, the Jordanians just might not be interested because they don't think it's authentic.
No, that's absolutely not true. The Department of Antiquities is putting it out there that they're not authentic, but they haven't done any testing themselves at all because these tests are very expensive. And the Jordanian people, they don't have the facility. Well, they have a Royal Scientific Society and the Atomic Energy Commission, but those test results have been suppressed. And the current director isn't doing anything about it, even though he's been handed the reports from the Ion Beam Center at the University of Surrey. He's just choosing to ignore it and insist that they're fake. So
let's Jennifer, let's backtrack here. So 2009, you visited. What happened between 2009 and 2011? You got these analysed, and who by?
Yes, well, we've worked with various scholars and to analyse them, and we continued as well doing different laboratory tests because in 2011 when
can you name the scholars? Is it okay to go on camera and name the scholars or?
We had Professor John Sawyer, Professor Philip Davies, Dr. Margaret Barker, Professor George Brooks,
and various others.
And we've had, some of them have been in confidence, and then latterly Professor Bernhard Lang. So very eminent scholars have examined them and believe them to be authentic.
And what exactly have they examined? What did they?
Well, the language. Largely the language and the iconography.
So you've taken photos of inside these?
Yes.
Which we can include.
Yeah.
Can we include some of the
absolutely.
photos?
I can give you some photographs later on before I go.
And this is inside. Yeah. And have they translated these?
They've translated them in part, and there's work ongoing on them.
We'll come back to this. Let's do. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, this is something both of you will do. So I guess one of the major negative things would be the backlash online, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Online, would you say online? Because when I first met David and he told me this incredible story, and in actual fact, David, how did we meet?
Yes. Well, I was driving through the Gloucestershire countryside and I saw a church and thought, oh, that looks rather fun. I'm going to go and have a look at that. And as I walked into the church, I I could see a couple of people by the altar area struggling with the light because it was quite dark inside.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
So I casually went up to a wall, saw a switch and turned it on, which I think must have given you the sense that I was familiar with the place, because you came up to me and said, "Do you know anything about this place?"
Yeah, I thought you were like the caretaker.
Yeah. And my reply to you was, "Sorry mate, no bugger all. Never been here in my life."
Yeah. And then we got into one conversation or other, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then we came back, and then
I gave you the trip of Christian iconography and all of that, and
which
you know,
was really interesting.
We talked about the books, and it was fun. It was a merry meeting.
So then, because for me personally, I met you, and then I came back home, and then I went on the internet just to check, if this was, actually, because you said you were on the news. You said you were on the BBC News, and so I wanted to kind of check that. If this was true or not, as anyone would, wouldn't they?
Yes.
And then I noticed, there were a few things. I mean, I didn't have time to really go into depth, but I did notice there was a few things where people were maybe saying that it wasn't true.
Yes, that's right.
That it was fantasy.
Yeah, a little less than pleasant. Some of the comments on there.
So how do you feel about that? What was your reaction to that?
Well, it was. We made the announcement on the BBC in 2011, and the first week.
After you'd got these scholars.
Yes, and we did it with the backing of the Jordanian government and the Director General of the Department of Antiquities at the time.
So the scholars, sorry to interrupt, but the scholars, when they were testing, they had the photos. Did they have any sort of tangible objects at that point?
Yes, they had. We had a codex which we brought back from Jordan, and before that we had a small lead tablet, with writing on it.
So they had something. Were you dating at that particular time? Were you dating? No, I mean
we couldn't. We'd had various tests done at that stage, and which had said to us on a regular basis, because we had 15 different laboratory tests undertaken at different laboratories
between 2009 and 2011.
Between 2009 and actually today.
But at that point, though,
we'd already had 9 or 10 done.
So then you went on the news.
Yes.
You felt really confident.
Yes.
You felt really confident.
Well, particularly
on the
because the Director General of the Department of Antiquities, he was an archaeometallurgist himself, and he felt confident enough, having read the reports, to back it and say, yes, let's go public with this. And so that's what we did. We did a press release, and it was approved by him and by some senior members of the Jordanian royal family. And so we went live with it, and it was great. We had a huge amount of positive publicity, and it went all around the world, and everyone was very excited. And then 8 days later, an Oxford classicist named Peter Toneman wrote an article for the Times Literary Supplement in which he condemned and denounced the Codices as modern tourist tat, and that was having not seen any of the test results, and also against some very eminent scholars who went on record on the press release.
What was he? Did he get hold of some photos or something? Is that how
he had one very small cropped photo of just a single line of Greek on one codex that we weren't even sure that was authentic, and we had made that quite clear to him. It was a copper codex, and we were just curious. It was only because a friend of ours' daughter was actually at the same college, and she just said, well, I can get this translated for you. And so he did that, and he said he thought it was fake, and we were like, fair enough, that's fine, and we agreed with it. And then
so maybe it wasn't his fault. Maybe he just thought, well, if all of their codices are like this.
No, because we specified that we had lead ones tested, and that we hadn't had this one tested, and we didn't think we had doubts about it. But he chose to ignore that because he since had got a promotion on the back of all the publicity he's engendered for himself in denouncing the Codices, and he went on. After that, he went on the BBC on TV, basically saying that he would stake his entire academic reputation on the collection of codices being modern forgeries.
Right.
And after he did that, then that basically, because he's an Oxford professor, even though it's not his area of expertise, he hadn't seen any of the test results, and he kind of went against the experts that had studied them. It didn't matter because he's from Oxford. Everybody listened to him, and I think they conveniently listened to him. And particularly, a lot of these American evangelist scholars just went online and just went crazy and were saying they're fake, they're fake, they're fake, even though they had seen absolutely nothing. But because he went out and said it, it gave them the courage to do that. And then it got very personal. And even though we've never met these people, they're don't know them. They don't know anybody that we know.
So then was it a character assassination?
It was a character assassination, and you know.
And they were trying to dig deeper.
If they can't discover something about you, they make it up, and that's.
And then they wanted to dig
did.
deeper and see that if you.
Well, if you shoot the messenger, then basically
Yeah.
you can discredit the discovery, and that's
Right.
and they largely succeeded for a certain amount of time, until the University of Surrey came on board and did the test, and they put out a press release. So if it actually came directly from the University of Surrey, and the heading of it was that the Jordan Codices are not modern forgeries, and that was.
So let's just backtrack here again. So you've been on the BBC News. Okay?
Yes.
And then you've got this. This guy's turned up and said no, they're fake.
Yes.
And then was there more backlash from there?
Oh
Did you
yeah,
have
I mean
more
there was
stacks
a
on top
really
of that?
nasty stuff from these scholars and pseudo scholars online, as we were trying to save the site.
Yeah.
And trying to save any more of these codices from
Mhm.
being sold off on the black market. And what they did was just give carte blanche to all of the smugglers and everybody to go ahead and do it. And the site was looted. I mean, what the damage that he caused, and then these
But you know, it's
bloggers afterwards was very, very bad.
I'm sure somebody like Graham Hancock is an expert at coming back to these, you know, people that are trying to say no, it's just a load of rubbish. What you're, you know, because I remember reading the book by Graham Hancock, The Gods, something.
Oh, Fingerprints of the Gods.
That was one
Yeah.
That's kind of what got me interested in the other side of history.
Yeah.
Which may be true, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not that.
The
versed
difference
in it,
between us and Hancock is in fact there's quite a wide chasm, I'd suggest, because
well, what I was saying that he deals with a lot of criticism. And he must have a
But
really
he's also an established
thick skin.
author too.
Yeah, and we were
Yeah.
backed. We
Yeah.
were backed entirely by academe on this discovery. We had proven beyond a doubt that they're authentic. We've proven beyond a doubt that they contain legible
So was it-
Paleo-Hebrew scripts, which some of these bloggers, a lot of these bloggers, in fact, ignorantly were saying, "Oh no, it doesn't make any sense." Of course, it didn't make any sense because they didn't speak the language.
And what about what's the reaction from family and friends?
Well, our friends know who we are, and obviously they were very upset for us because, you know, the picture that was painted of us online by these people that didn't know us was quite monstrous, and they knew that it was totally untrue, so they felt very badly for us that we had to go through that, and no support from family. That was but that was very disappointing, but you know.
So do you think in regards to friends and family, do you think maybe some of them were trying to say, you know, maybe don't give yourself too much to this whole thing because...
Well, it was too late. The problem was because the cat had already been let out of the bag and everything was out there, so it created this just massive furore that was out of control, and more people were jumping on the bandwagon because that's what, you know, the way people are. It's unfortunately, and then a lot of the scholars were so afraid of being attacked themselves that they...
Oh yeah, once it's a hot potato, that's it, no one's going to touch it.
No, and they just let us be the sitting targets,
Trash.
and nobody would even say, this is really wrong, what's being done. No one would even say that. So, but yet they were all wanting our analyses and wanting us to help and, you know, provide everything, but nobody was willing to stand up and say, wait a minute, these guys aren't bad people. And that was, you know, that's not very nice.
So this whole story then became rather personal for you, and you know
it's hard
you've
not to
suffered
be
a bit
when
from,
yes,
you know,
absolutely.
you've suffered from
But
that.
but the difficult thing is that nobody actually looked, because the attacks were quite undignified and personal and very ill reflecting on the people doing it. Nobody looked at their background and said, well, who are these people? And if you actually scratch the surface...
But the internet can be like that, can't it?
Well, it is, but and that is the problem, is that
Yeah.
nobody looked to see who they were and what their backgrounds were,
And that's the problem.
what their agenda was in doing
Yeah.
so.
Because the problem is as well nowadays, if you Google something, if you're caught up in something, and you Google your name or you Google a subject, it's going to come straight up. So the bad news is going to rise to the top because that's what's interesting.
And the vested interests will keep it there as well.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
You know, why you're still committed to this 100%? Are you still committed to getting the whole story out? Is it kind of almost now that you kind of want to see it to the end so that you can kind of clear your name
Absolutely.
against all the...
Yeah, absolutely. And
negative
I think we just want to move on from it all because it's dragged on for such a long time. We never could have expected that, and you know, we just hoping that something will happen, whether if it comes out enough in the media, there'll be enough pressure and somebody will do something, because it's really we've pushed so long for it because we felt that it was knowledge that everybody has a right to know. It's our heritage, and it's not up to other people to determine whether they're suppressed and to determine what knowledge that we have and what we don't have. And I think we're getting very close, and we have some more information that's going to be coming out soon, which we're really positive that is going to make a very big difference and finally offer that break that we've been looking for a very long time.
Some people might be suspicious that you're trying to make money or trying to...
Well, that's been the biggest accusation, which is very ironic that was the thing that they were most concerned about, and I think even above, a religious threat, because a lot of these American scholars and Christian scholars, they make a lot of money from writing books, giving lectures, TV. A lot of them sell religious tat, mugs, iPad covers. I mean, you name it. It's a huge booming business, and they saw us. That's like the pot calling kettle black. As people that were going to be a threat to their Christian business, and I think that's really what a lot of it is about. And also, a lot of these scholars have spent years and built careers on towing a certain line, and here we're coming over and saying, no, even though we didn't explicitly say that, but the implication is that their scholarship is going to be turned upside down. So we've just upset a lot of apple carts on a lot of levels. And
furthermore, we're now actually working officially now with the University of Surrey on continuing analysis of other codices, and they're backing us to the hilt. We're now both attached to them academically, which has helped us hugely, and working with them has been great because now that they've seen for themselves that the things are authentic and that they're the real McCoy, they really want to get down to work to find out what they say, what they mean, and continue this quest. They're very excited by it.
So can you tell me what's inside, what is written inside the bulk of these codices that you've found in Jordan?
Yeah, we've got quotes from the book of Proverbs and Psalms, which are all Old Testament texts. We've also got quotes from the book of Daniel, which talks about the coming of the Son of Man, or as it would be in normative Hebrew, the Son of the Man. We've got other references as well, which are kind of talking about the differences between the community that wrote them, their expectations of who and what the Messiah is, as opposed to obviously strands of Judaism beyond their purview, outside of their community. But one of the most important things that's written inside them is literally on the codices, there's a picture of the menorah, the famous Jewish candlestick, and underneath the lower branches in Paleo-Hebrew there's a text that says Elek Beitum, and that means literally when translated, I will walk uprightly, or likewise I will shine in righteousness. Now that's, we believe, is a resurrection text. It's talking about somebody confronting God and actually standing upright in his presence. So in other words, they've lived a high moral life with great moral purpose, and it's talking about, I've got to get up and go.
So basically, the language that was used to write these codices that you found, it's going back, it's an old form of Hebrew.
Yeah, it's so old that it sprung out of the Phoenician language family some 12 to 1300 years prior to the era of Jesus.
And I guess there's the same situation in archaeology where people are trying to be famous and trying to get a name for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge amount of egoism, but it's not just that. It's also who is funding them. Are they loyal to those funders? Does that mean, therefore, that they can only say certain things? And then there's the viewpoint of the university itself that they represent. Is it, for instance, a Trinitarian university where it's, basically of an evangelical persuasion? In that case, if you say something controversial, beware, you've got to be very careful. So there's all of those political things to take into account. And yet, in that famous scene prior to the crucifixion, Jesus before Pilate, Pilate says, why are you here? And Jesus says, I came to bear witness to the truth. And Pilate says, well, what is truth? Boom, boom. And you kind of think, these are people who manipulate fact. Archaeology, whatever you think about it, it's mostly about interpretation. So you can take the fact and you can run with it in any number of ways. But as for truth, that's a much more poisoned chalice. And that's basically, I believe, what the Codices are offering. They're offering the truth about Christian origins and where they come from. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
And so have you looked at all of the text from these codices?
Yeah.
Has everything been photographed? You know, this farmer had these.
Bedouin. Hassan the Bedouin had.
Hassan.
Yeah, he had 35 codices and a number of small scrolls.
Did he photograph everything?
I photographed everything. I took high definition photographs.
So does anybody? Is this public domain or just you have this?
At the moment, only I have it. We are in the process of setting up an image library, but I haven't put an awful lot of it online because the abuse we have received from academe has been such that I thought, well, why should I expose myself to any more ridicule? It just doesn't make, it just doesn't make sense.
So have you translated all the syntax that's on there?
No, I'm not a Paleo-Hebrew expert myself. I mean, obviously after 10 years of being involved with this, I've become much more knowledgeable about it, and I can read the script to a certain extent. And,
do you think that?
But I've asked the experts, and they've done an awful lot of translating, but there's a lot more yet to be done.
And so, like in one codex, how many pages are there? I mean, is it a big book? Is it how many?
Depends upon the codex you're looking at. Some of them have, like the slimmer ones have about 5 metal plates stitched together, but there are others with upwards of 20 odd plates.
And just with your hand, how big are they?
They range from that size. The central codex with the image of Jesus on is about that size, and it's described as such in the Book of Revelation, chapter 5.
So the writing must be really small in it.
Oh yes, it is. Yeah, it's quite small. And then some of the bigger ones are about this size, and they're very they're very paperbacks. Well, sorry, actually large hardback sized, and very corroded and very telling.
How did they etch? Was it a knife that they etched?
This is what's really interesting. We wondered about this for years. We thought perhaps moulds had been cut out in hard rock, because when you looked at the photographs, you could see granulation. And then our analyst actually had to go to a family party somewhere in Norfolk and got talking to the only producer of lead sheeting left in the country, and he told him immediately how these things were made, and it's fascinating. You take a bed of sand and you wet it. Now you know what sand is like when it's wet, because if you walk along the seashore you'll see your footprints, and they last for quite a while. You'll get many tide inflows coming in, and gradually it will diminish. So basically what the water's doing is compacting the sand.
Right.
And then obviously they hand wrote into the sand and put in these images of palm trees and menorah, the Jewish candlesticks, etc. Then into that they just poured molten lead, and within a matter of a minute or so that would have cooled. They could peel it back, and you had lead of a uniform thickness, and it could then be cut up into plates. And of course then they were stitched together, literally holes punched through the sides, and sometimes all around, and then sealed. So fascinating things.
Give me a quick summation. What is it saying anything different to what's? Is there anything interesting that's inside it?
All I can say is that it's very, very Jewish. A lot of it seems quite forbidding. We're not talking here about biographical details or anything like that. If you want to find biographical details, you've got to search in the fact that it's handwritten, and you've got to look at all of that and what they were meaning by it. But a lot of it is just religious, expression in terms of parables and statements like that. And I suspect that what's happening is that if you go then to that text in the Old Testament as such, and then read what's above it and below it, that's what it's giving you. It's giving you the whole text, which is a justification for the Messiah who will come. But for instance, on the front page of the Central Codex, we've got variant readings. It could well be that the line underneath says, "Praise be to he who has come," or "who will come." Someone has actually determined that it refers to the bridegroom, which could be a reference to the figure of wisdom, who features all over the codices. And of course, wisdom in this sense is female. It's the divine feminine. So that offers a difference of opinion immediately, because the divine feminine, in its original state, was actually the figure of the Holy Spirit. And I think it makes a lot more sense. So you've got that idea that you've got God the Father, if you like, God the Mother or the Holy Ghost, and then God the Son, who is in the form of the King. But what's really interesting about this is that it's what I call the Clark Kent Superman moment. I don't think that Jesus was Jesus Christ until his baptism. That's what the Gospels tell us. What the Codices tell us, it seems to me, and from researches I've undertaken, is that I think that they're telling us that in that chapter in the Last Supper where he goes into the upper room, that actually the upper room is the interior of the temple itself, and that he's gone into the temple to be crowned king, more or less, the king of Israel. But he's not a temporal king. He's a kind of a spiritual king, because he says this to Pilate. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world," and I think that's more or less what he's doing. And he's gone in there. He's been crowned, and at that moment, he's in that really secret, dark place called the Holy of Holies. And in that moment, the spirit of the divine has entered into him, and when he comes out at that moment, he's then Jesus Christ, Jesus the Anointed One. So that the spirit being in him, he's the king, and the king is like a semi-divine, king God, which is what Jesus effectively is in the Christian religion today. So any utterance he makes is both divine and holy. So a mortal man has actually emerged as immortal, if you like, and that's I think what they're telling us. They're telling us that story that.
So is it different from the other writings of him, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example?
Yeah, I think.
Completely on a different...
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's interesting in all of this is that, as I said earlier on, it's all about interpretation, and different schools of thought interpret the Dead Sea Scrolls in different ways. Some say, they're just purely Jewish, but as I said earlier on, we don't know what Judaism was. There was no stock Judaism at the time. Some say, we could be looking even at early Christian documents. This is about the scrolls. Now, obviously, we know from the timescales that that's possibly unlikely. But however, there are statements in the Codices that are to be found on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And given that the Codices are books, they're in book form, that would suggest therefore a link with the community who wrote the scrolls. And that's why we know them to be Nazarene or Essene documents, I'm sure. That is to say the early church.
Right.
And we've got something here which is literally the foundation stone of Christianity. Do we have anything to be afraid of? I don't think so. I think it could lead to a massive renewed increase in Christianity, but in a positive sense.
But who wrote the book? Who wrote the Codices, in your opinion?
In my opinion,
yeah.
The early church father Papias, who was the Bishop of Hierapolis in around about the 140s AD, says that the oracles of the Lord were composed by the Apostle Matthew. If Papias is talking, when he says of oracles, he's actually talking about testimonial structures, as in our book, which has got oracles in it, then the answer is the Apostle Matthew and the Apostle John. And I believe that's that those are the authors
of these codices.
Yeah. Because the question is that
were they written it by hand, or is it?
Yeah, they were written in hand into the sand, and then the lead was poured over. I think
somebody would have done that. Obviously, somebody probably who was professional at the time doing it. Would have done it for them.
In some of the journeys of St. Paul in the region, particularly around the coast of Lebanon and Anatolia, modern day Turkey, he talks about meeting metal workers and people like that. So these people had knowledge of these things. But we mustn't forget as well that the books were all sealed. They were wrapped up in pieces of linen and placed into arks or boxes, and then they were sealed again, and then they were sealed in caves. Right. So these were meant to be seen by very, very few people, it seems to me, and therefore they contained secret teachings, the secret teachings of the church, which is why I believe they were written by the apostles, because only they could have had that knowledge.
So 2000, we've touched upon 2009. 2011, David, can you explain what happened? Why did you go back, and what happened when you went back, and who went back in 2000?
Yeah, we basically got in touch with the Jordanians through contacts, and the head of the Department of Antiquities then was Professor Ziad al-Saad, and he invited us across to Jordan. But first of all, we made an announcement on the BBC. with the blessings of the government of Jordan, and then we flew across to Jordan to discuss this with Professor al-Saad, and we went to the site, and they were really, really excited.
Professor al-Saad is from the Jordanian Antiquities.
He was the head of antiquities in Jordan. He's now one of the senior executives of the University of Yarmouk. In fact, I think he's vice chancellor of the University of Yarmouk, which of course is known as the Harvard of the East. He's a very eminent man. But he was also in for a very hard time as well, because literally within a month or so of us departing Jordan, the cover-up began. The pressure was on him to not release the results, to be silent about it, and they even had false allegations made against him in terms of tampering with an archaeological site, which was completely untrue, but was enough to distract him away from the subject matter for a couple of years whilst he fought to clear his name.
So he got in trouble?
Yes, simply for being involved, and we think that the
so
main...
is that when they turned? Is that when the Jordanian government turned? Did they turn on you, or what happened?
In retrospect, I think that was the time when they began to turn, and then
2011. So
yeah.
Let's just cut back here. So there's this guy. What was his name again? Professor
Ziad al-Saad,
and he's a professor, right?
Really, really super
cool guy. Cool
professional guy.
We like this guy, yeah?
Yeah, one of the best in the world.
Okay, we like this guy, so...
Very much. He's a really great man.
And he came on board and said, I think it's true.
He stated explicitly that the discovery was much, much bigger than the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that what we have here are truly authentic documents.
Right.
And of course, we thought...
Should we set up should we put him and the other guy who didn't like it in a boxing room? See who would win? Who's tougher?
Dr. al-Saad by a long shot.
Really?
Yeah.
Should we bring him over and get him to meet this?
Muntajam Howie, the present director, is
I think that's the best way to sort it out, man to man, isn't it?
He's a very sad man, I have to say.
Right.
So
we got this professor out in Jordan. He thinks so he believes it's true.
Yes.
Blah blah blah.
He goes to the site.
But who restrains him? Who's above him?
It's members of the Department of the Interior and other aspects of government as well.
So they're not happy. They're like, no, let's stop this.
Yeah, political pressure
Why?
has been put on them I suspect from a certain neighbouring country who don't want this to emerge, because it's going to take the limelight away from certain of their tourist sites and certain of their discoveries. So at that point then, we realised that we were going to be having a bit of a tough time. But we had one thing to our advantage. When we went to Jordan in 2011, we returned with a codex.
Another codex?
Yeah.
So now you've got two?
No, we've handed them back the tablet, which had been smuggled out of their country, as an act of duty and of decency. We gave it back to them because we felt
this was the 2009 one, was it?
This is the one we'd taken out in 2009. We gave this to the Department of Antiquities, and we gave them another copper tablet which we had.
Why didn't you keep them?
Because we felt it was our duty. We felt it was honourable to give back to Jordan what was Jordan's.
So now you have nothing?
Now we have nothing, no.
That's a real shame.
It's a pity, but there are other codices which we're in the process of analysing at the moment, and of which there will be an announcement, I'm quite sure, quite soon.
They're in England, so there are some more codices in England, right?
There are others coming here, and furthermore, we had this codex when we came back, and we had it on loan ostensibly for a year. I got in touch with the Embassy of Jordan when the year was up, and I received no response from them whatsoever about it. So I thought, well, whilst I've got it, we might as well continue to analyse it. We took it to the University of Surrey, where they did initial tests, but the initial tests showed a small radioactive signature from one of the isotopes, which suggested modern provenance, or reasonably modern provenance. And we were very uncertain about it, because the script on it, the state of the corrosion on it, though not as corroded as many of the others, there was still enough there for our analysts to have grave doubts about the dating. And then the miracle came in summer of 2016. Surrey agreed to retest the codex, but this time they break the seals and open it. And the news came back that there was no radiation whatsoever it was the real McCoy. It was well over a couple of 100 years old, and if you look at the inscriptions and everything else, it couldn't have been created 200 years ago. Our analysts went further and said that on the basis of the corrosion, which is basically what you have on the microscopic level, and sometimes it's really obvious in the codices because there are tiny holes in them.
Yeah.
What's happened is that the lead is impure, and over a course of 2,000 years, the chemical impurities have escaped from the metal matrix, and they've formed crystals on the surface and then dropped out.
But
so that's how we dated them. The key to the codices is that the impurities level within the lead matches Roman levels again, and it's fairly obvious that at some stage in antiquity a lot of the silver has been removed from some of the lead, but there are others where it hasn't been. And the key point here is that the corrosion has taken place over a very long period of time. Now, I said to you about the cover of the codex when it was first tested by Surrey having a radioactive signature. They now worked out how that came about. They found that whilst it was in the cave, water from the exterior had washed in and over the cover of the codex and gave it that radiation signature, because in the 1940s, when the atomic bomb was developed, suddenly they were exploded in the atmosphere, you had radioactive polonium. So you can date things from the atomic period and to the pre-atomic period.
Okay, so in 2011, you picked up a codex from where?
We were given a codex by the Department of Antiquities
by this cool guy.
By the Department of Antiquities.
What's his name again?
Professor Ziad al-Saad.
He sounds a really cool dude. If I'm ever gigging in Jordan, I'm going to seek him out and have a tea with him.
He's a brilliant man.
And have a mint tea.
And,
could happen next year. Who knows?
He's great. And so we brought it back ostensibly for analysis. We were charged with getting it analysed and finding a proper laboratory to undertake that analysis, which is precisely what we did. And then, of course, in 2016, finally it was revealed to be authentic and to be 2,000 years old. And then...
So you went back and then they said, come here, mate, bring the codex with you.
Yeah, but I didn't have the codex with me. I left it behind in the UK because...
Is it still here?
Nope.
Where is it now?
It's now back in Jordan. It has disappeared into the ether, probably for a lot of money.
So you've done the round of TV?
Yeah.
And then the antiquities place said, come here.
Yep, they demanded I go in, so I went in to see them, and much to my bemusement, I was surrounded not by just the director himself, but a whole coterie of people. And the one thing I noticed, I have to tell you this, the first thing I noticed about the Department of Antiquities is that there's not a single antiquity in sight. What you have, literally, is rows upon rows of box files, bureaucracy, So that kind of tells you what to expect in a way.
So there's no, it's not a museum and there's no objects?
No, there's nothing there.
They've sold it all?
You never know. I was surrounded by these people, and then I was surrounded and accused and abused by a very...
Did you have a translator, yeah?
Yes, I did. A very ruddy-faced Dr. Muntajam Howie, who was an extremely unpleasant man, but very amusing, I have to say, because he was more apoplectic, and he was basically saying that the codices are fake.
Yep.
Which I challenged him. I said, well, the University of Surrey's report will actually, disprove that. I said, why don't you take a copy? No. Apparently, I had no rights to publish any academic work on the codices at all, forever, anywhere in the world. Which, frankly, was just idiotic. Because, of course, I do. I live in the UK.
Yeah, it's free speech.
I'm a UK citizen, a citizen of Ireland, and, frankly, the whole thing just descended into farce.
So was there shouting?
From his side, yes. I'm afraid to say...
You were saying, don't do this, how dare you!
Nerve. I decided that I'm just going to just sit it out.
It's a shame you couldn't record it. It's a shame you could have videoed it or recorded it.
I did record it on my telephone.
So you've recorded it, you got this on...
Yeah,
anyway,
I
how did you get out of there?
I spent 2 hours being interrogated, because it wasn't an interview at all, it was an interrogation. and I was behind me were two very swarthy gentlemen dressed in army fatigues,
Right.
and it got very, very nasty to the effect that my life was threatened
By this guy.
by most of them.
They just said, look, if you publish anything, we're going to come and...
Cut your throat.
Right.
And
They weren't messing about.
no, he said also they would shoot me, and
They would shoot you.
yeah,
Right.
and I said, look, make up your minds because I can only die once. So however, I said, if you want to do it, then go ahead, be my guest,
Right.
because the truth is out there, and if you do kill me, then you'll just make a bigger story of it.
Right. So how did it end? How did you get out?
Well, I was informed by them that I wouldn't be allowed to leave Jordan until the Codex had been returned.
Right.
And then I thought, well, fine.
Well, if it's fake, why do they want it back?
If it's fake, exactly. Why would they want it back? Why would it? So a couple of days later, Jennifer and I were due to return to the UK, and we were forcibly parted at the airport gates, and Jennifer was allowed to go home. I was, I was held captive. And
So they kept you...
It was very unpleasant.
House arrest?
Yes, I was under house arrest for a while, and then there was an all points bulletin put on me at all of the ports of departure, and there was also a lot of harassment, people following me. It all got very cloak and dagger, and it was very, very nasty. And I'm afraid to say that it did, yes, I would admit it sort of had its effect, but at the end of the day, I thought to myself, well, they're going to all of this trouble, and they're showing me, and they're showing the world, that by their actions, these things really are very, very important.
So what was the outcome? How did you get out of the country, and how did you...
In the end, I had to pay at my own expense to have somebody courier the Codex from the UK to Jordan,
Right.
and return it. But I was allowed to leave the country, and threatened again that if I started to tell this story, if I was to talk about the Codices any further to promote their authenticity, that they would send somebody to kill me. And I just thought, well, it's just really sad that a really great discovery has come down now to...
And who said they would kill you?
A bunch of threats.
Who said they would kill you?
The Jordanian government.
There was an official that actually...
Yes, and it's very sad. I suspect that it's not really their fault. I suspect that pressure is being leveraged on them by forces from on high, whose interests are purely monetary in terms of concerns. And we know for a fact that there are a couple of very high-profile smugglers who themselves have been charged and indicted in the United States for their activities, who are still in operation and who are dealing in codices. In 2013, the Department of Antiquities storage facility was broken into, and the only thing that was removed were codices from the cave site in northern Jordan.
So how many codices in your estimate, a rough estimate, are there in existence now?
Well, of the Jordanian hoard, I think there was around about 70, of which now probably only 35 still exist. Because
their whereabouts are known.
The whereabouts are known. I mean, I hope that they've been sold into private collections rather than being destroyed. But to be honest with you, in the medieval period, just at the time of the Crusades, the Pope gave instructions to the Crusading Knights and the heads of the Templar organisation that a cache of 70 books made of lead, which had been hidden in caves somewhere in Palestine, were to be tracked down, to be located, and to be destroyed. Now,
so who gave that?
1,000 years later.
Who gave that order?
The Pope himself.
To the Templars?
Yep.
To the Knights Templar?
Yep, to the Knights Templar.
And did they carry that out? Well,
this is on record.
Could that be the reason why they excavated? Was it Temple of
I wouldn't be at all surprised, because
Well, is that what they were looking
it seems to me that if you're going to be excavating the temple itself in the middle of Jerusalem, that the rumours therefore would be exaggerated.
Because they knew what they were looking for something.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the rumours of them digging there would have been much more substantial for the time, because truth gets out in many ways and forms. So there would have been much more specific information about what had been found and what had been located. But instead, we've got this rather strange rumour of the Templars digging. I think, therefore, the rumour is a sign that it came from somewhere else in Palestine, not from Jerusalem. And if the rumour, therefore, has come from the North Country and has reached Jerusalem, that's why the rumour is vague. Because something has been discovered, it has been located, but for whatever reason, those knights have probably used it for their own ends.
Because they were excavating, they found tools, haven't they? And they found evidence that they were digging underneath that temple.
Yeah.
So they were looking for something there.
Yeah, definitely.
And what were they looking?
But we don't know what they were looking for. We don't know if they were given orders to look for something, except, of course, from what I've quoted from the Pope. It seems to me that perhaps they were looking for a cache. And
is this on record? Can you read about this, about the Pope's instructions, about 70 codices?
Yes, I was given this information in person by Professor Yuri Stoyanov of the School of Oriental and African Studies in London.
SOAS.
Yes, SOAS. Yeah.
I'm doing a radio interview there. I'm performing. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But is he the only person that knows about this? Popes?
He told me of this about 5 or 6 years ago.
So it's not in the public domain, this?
Apparently it is. I'm trying to track down the reference. But he gave me the reference and said he'd uncovered it himself. And I was amazed, but again, not surprised.
Okay, so coming back to the last thing we want to talk about is this organisation you say in America has a vendetta against you. So, first of all...
No, they don't have a vendetta against me. They have a vendetta against the truth.
Okay.
They have a vendetta against any fact that doesn't support their wild theories of who Christ was or what he wasn't.
And what evidence do you have that they're trying to, do to mock what you say?
We've had threats directly from them.
So in kind of what shape or form are you allowed to...
Saying that if we continue with this, they'll be taking action against us, and we thought, well, what kind of action can they take? We're just trying to do our duty.
Well, it's free speech. You can say anything you want as long as you're not...
Apparently, yeah, but you say it's free speech.
Oh, yeah, I think it depends what free speech is.
My own experience of that has been otherwise, actually.
Well, you can't, for example, be nasty about somebody's religion.
Well, again, I people say it's a challenge to the faith. Well, it's not my job. It's not my right.
All you're doing is just facts. It's just facts.
I don't want to challenge people's faith.
No.
But
you've found these books.
We're dealing with historical documentation.
Yeah, so all you're interested in, you found these books, you want to date them, find out if they're real or not, and you want to find out what's inside them.
Yes, exactly.
That's it.
Yeah. He's getting out there. And you have to wonder why.
Okay, so now we've heard all this information about these codices. What do the codices signify? What do they?
Let me tell you something now. This is really interesting.
On camera, yeah.
Yeah, the small codex with the face of the Nazarene type face on the front cover, which we believe and know to be that of Jesus Christ. We opened it for the first time in 2,000 years in the kitchen of the Bedouin Hassan in 2009. He wanted to open it, he wanted to break the seals, and we couldn't stop him. But one thing we did do is we took samples of the dust that fell from it, and we got a couple of samples of the metal of the binding rings. When he opened it, we were absolutely astonished. I've never seen anything so stunningly beautiful in my entire life. It was just the most amazing thing. To go from this front cover portrait of the typical Nazarene with the long hair, the beard, the moustache, and this kind of pose of the man of woes, the man who has been or is about to be crucified. And then we opened it up and there was this bright shining face, beardless, moustacheless. It had flames for hair and was also encapsulated in a halo.
What colour was the skin?
Well, because it was solid silver.
Oh, so it was
shone
etching.
brightly. And that's really interesting because that brought to mind the quote in Numbers 6:25, "May the Lord's face shine upon you," which
Right.
is a sign of blessing, you see. And of course, when the king went into the Holy of Holies in the old Solomonic period...
So the Holy of Holies is the inner chamber of the church.
It's the inner chamber of the Temple of Jerusalem.
Sorry, not the church, the temple.
Yeah, of the Temple of Jerusalem. It's where God personally was said to reside.
Because like in
So-
Ethiopia, the Ethiopian,
That's right, yeah.
they have their own.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
That's where they say the Ark of the Covenant is
That's
in
right,
one of the.
yeah. Well, we're going one better. We're going to the temple itself, where the Ark of the Covenant resided, in this cube called the Holy of Holies. And this is the Indiana Jones moment, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We've opened the Codex, and there is the Lord's face shining out at us.
Yeah.
And it's pretty obvious that has got something to do with the Holy of Holies, with that central place in Jerusalem where God is said to reside. This is the big moment, you know. And of course, in Solomonic times, the king would be enthroned upon the Kaparet seat, which is the throne on top of the Ark of the Covenant. So in other words, he became one with God. So we've got Jesus Christ doing the same thing. It's the old formula, and this is what the books are bearing testimony to.
So obviously the codices are. Let me get this straight in my really dumb mind. The codices are the codices are explaining about Jesus's life.
Yes,
They're documenting his life.
They're documenting both by text and implication, details of his mission.
Do they mention his name?
Yes, they do have the names of the apostles on. We've been told by a number of scholars that they found the names of Yeshua, of Jacob, in other words James, and also of John, or Yohanan as his name would have been in Hebrew. Yeshua, of course, being Jesus. We have got those names on the codices. Obviously, we need to do more work to look at those names and also to look at the context in which they've been said. But another interesting thing you need to know, Clement of Alexandria in the 1st or 2nd centuries wrote a book called Hypotyposes, in which he says that the Lord, Jesus, gave the secret teachings to James, Peter and John, the only names that are mentioned on the codices. We're looking here at the deeper inner secrets, the deepest inner secrets of Christianity.
No.
This is astonishing stuff.
Have you?
When you look at what those secrets might well be, it's extraordinary.
Have you ever met? Because this is one guy I really love, obviously in history. Although he does, I think he deals with more ancient history of like 10,000 years ago. This is what his whole thing is. But with Graham Hancock, have you ever had a chance to talk to him about it?
No, I never have. I'd like to have a chat with him to see what he feels about it all, because obviously he's been hounded as well by critics and others. But
I mean, I think he's a cool guy.
Yeah,
he's a very because he went to the he even went to the jungle. And took DMT. You know DMT?
Yeah, DMT.
You know, ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And went on a couple of trips.
We've got a friend, the producer Robert Watts, who's done the same thing. Robert produced the Star Wars films and the Indiana Jones films, the original ones with Steven Spielberg. And Robert's a great chap, and he's done all of that. And he was telling us of some of his extraordinary experiences in taking that. And it's all part of spirituality in a way. I'm not promoting drugs taking, but however, if it's under controlled conditions and it's helping you to kind of draw knowledge down
I think it's
from above, then
something that you.
Then surely Jesus was doing the same. He was a mystic. He rode the chariots to heaven.
Yeah, it was
back knowledge with him.
the kind of shamanic.
Yeah, exactly.
Deal,
and surely that's what the crucifixion was one of the greatest shamanic journeys of all.
And is the codice? Is that what the codices lean more towards?
Yeah, I think so.
Rather than a supernatural.
Yeah, absolutely. I forget the supernatural of Christianity. What you're looking at is something actual. It's an act of consciousness. To be a Christian is an act of consciousness. But Christianity in its original sense. Not
There's two other questions I want to ask. First of all, do you regret ever getting involved in this?
No, I don't. It's cost me dearly, but at the end of the day, we found the truth, and if we found the truth and I'd have ignored it, then what kind of a person does that make me? So, in a sense, I just feel that we have to press on.
Personally, my opinion is, when I met you, I was just thinking, this is a really cool guy.
Oh, thank you. Never remember myself as being cool.
Well, I like people who have got a story to tell, who,
And we need people to take an interest, because I'm not talking here about highfalutin theological, stuff. I'm talking about history, and it's really interesting history as well,
So, David, to conclude, what's the plan for the future? What's the plan? What's the game plan? Where do we go from here?
We're actually testing more codices with the University of Surrey at the moment, and we're hoping to announce those results soon. And then we're going to be, obviously working towards making awareness of these things to a much wider audience. And I'm hoping that very soon our book will be published, outlining the adventure and outlining the ideas as to both what the codices say and what they represent. It's a fascinating story, and it's something that needs to be read by people. And I'm hoping that very soon a publisher will come along and say, right, come on, we're going to allow you the space to tell that story. Because so far we've not been allowed to.
Right. Well, I wish you real good luck with this, the whole adventure, and I hope it comes to a nice conclusion for you.
Brilliant, thanks very much.
And thanks for coming along, and all the best.
Cheers.
Take care, man. All the best, man. Take care.